China's biggest freshwater lake looks set for unprecedented flooding. Areas around the lake are already among the worst hit in recent weeks, and residents are fearing the worst. China raised its flood response alert on Sunday to the second highest level, this as heavy rain battered regions along the Yangtze River. It's not just floods battering areas of China. Now earthquakes are shaking various regions. 6 earthquakes within 2 days, one even reaching a magnitude 5.1. A video circulating on Chinese social media is causing concern over the country's food security. It alleges a granary of a major state-run grain stockpiler is full of moldy, poor-quality corn. And an exclusive, a former Chinese web censor exposes the inside story of the Chinese regime's infiltration into the free world. He takes us behind the scenes of censorship at TikTok. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China raised its flood response alert on Sunday to the second highest level as heavy rain battered regions along the Yangtze River. The eastern provinces of Jiangsu and Jiangxi are among the worst hit.
Flooding in Jiangxi province pushed water levels of Lake Poyang, China's biggest freshwater lake, to above 74 feet, a historical high and well above the alert level of 64 feet. In Aba, Sichuan province in the southwest, almost 200 feet of roadbed was destroyed by a river, overflown by days of heavy rainfall. So far this year, some 141 people have died or gone missing in the floods, which have ravaged over 8 million acres of farmland and flattened 28,000 homes. Economic losses total close to $12 billion, affecting nearly 34 million people, with more rain expected in the coming days. According to the Ministry of Water Resources, 212 rivers have exceeded alerting levels since early July, with 19 of them rising to historical highs. China has a 4-tier flood control emergency response system, with level 1 representing the most severe.
The water level of China's largest freshwater lake hit record-breaking levels. Regions around the lake face the risk of serious flooding, while water levels continue to rise. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
Regions around China's biggest freshwater lake are now bracing for new rounds of unprecedented flooding. China saw its worst flood in recent years in 1998, and this past weekend, the water level inside Poyang Lake broke the 1998 record. The lake is located in areas already among one of the worst hit in China, the southeastern Jiangxi province. Local authorities raised the flood alert response to its highest level. A Chinese state-owned media reported that over 500,000 people have been evacuated, but some are still trapped without any basic supplies.
Now I don't have any food to eat. I don't even have any rice at home. What should I do?
Miss Yu's village at the south of the lake has been submerged. She is over 70 years old and hasn't received any government aid at this point. 3 hours away, northeast of the lake, a resident said the flood burst many embankments.
We're in a very miserable situation. The embankments have burst and water is overflowing.
Traffic also shut down.
The roads are gone. They're all broken and submerged.
Zhang now relies on boats to get around. He fears the flooding will get worse. China's National Weather Service said the water level inside Poyang Lake will continue to rise over the next days. Flood control remains a challenging task. Jiangxi province has over 1,500 miles of embankments surrounding rivers and lakes, and almost 90% of these bodies of water are seeing water levels going above the warning level. Han Lu and Juliet Song, NTD News.
A major flood has struck the upper reaches of the Yangtze River, China's longest river. An internal document we obtained shows the river's water was flowing at a rate of over 80,000 cubic meters per second. It also explained that it's forecast to exceed 90,000 cubic meters per second. According to local Chinese media, the river's flow rate was so high that it will soon break the highest record recorded in the last century, if it hasn't already. Officials in Zhejiang, a city located on the southern shore of the Yangtze River, issued an emergency notice on Monday, requesting that the entire city be evacuated. Now we focus on another area along the river, the Three Gorges Dam. Flooding is getting worse in some areas near China's famous Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydropower project in the world. Experts have warned that the dam is on the brink of collapse. That means as many as 400 million people may be at risk. But in a twist, local Chinese media outlets and social media platforms published an article saying, "Sorry, the Three Gorges Dam has done its best. Please stop criticizing it." The report says the dam is at its wit's end, adding that over 50 rivers in 8 provinces have already exceeded their flood warning levels. It also says that no matter how powerful the Three Gorges Dam is, it cannot let the water flow backwards. Officials in charge of the dam project have warned people not to pin their hopes on the Three Gorges Dam, as its capacity for flood storage is limited. Back in 2007, Chinese officials claimed the dam was designed to withstand once-in-a-millennium flood levels. Over half of China is now waterlogged. Now, at the same time, earthquakes have struck. According to China's seismic network, within 2 days, 6 earthquakes, magnitude 3 or higher, hit various areas of the country. 4 of them happened on Sunday. One hit the city of Tangshan, 90 miles east of Beijing. The quake clocked in at a magnitude 5.1. More than 30 consecutive aftershocks followed. About 40 years ago, the same city endured a magnitude 7.6 earthquake. According to official figures, 240,000 people died, making it the 3rd deadliest earthquake in recorded history. Unofficial figures say the real death toll was 3 times higher. City officials called Sunday's quake the aftershock of the bigger one 40 years ago, adding that locals have nothing to worry about. More earthquakes hit in the southwest province of Sichuan and the special district of Chongqing. Both areas are located along the upper reaches of the Yangtze River and upstream from the Three Gorges Dam. 2 quakes, one magnitude 4 and one magnitude 3, hit the areas on Sunday. That's after a magnitude 3.2 earthquake hit the same area in Sichuan a mere 10 days ago. That same afternoon, a magnitude 4.4 earthquake shook an area in the southwest province of Yunnan. One day later on Monday, 2 more quakes, this time magnitudes 5.0 and 3.4, struck 2 regions in Xinjiang. Now we turn to China's education system, where another form of censorship is taking place. Chinese regime censorship is invading Chinese schools in a new way. A new campaign has been launched to remove some books from classrooms. Authorities didn't list specific book titles, but said the illegal books are those that violate the Communist Party's guidelines and policies, smear or defame the party, the country's leaders, or its so-called heroes, are not in line with the party's socialist core values, or promote religious doctrines and canons, narrow nationalism, or racism. Among them are books about Christianity, Buddhism, and copies of Animal Farm and 1984, George Orwell's novels about authoritarian regimes. This is the first national campaign to target books in over 40 years, and the first following Mao Zedong's era. A video on Chinese social media alleges a granary of a major state-run grain stockpiler was full of moldy, poor-quality corn. This, along with past history of corruption by the public stockpiler, is causing concerns over the country's food security.
A video has gone viral on China's social media site Weibo, and it reveals the alarmingly poor quality corn coming from China's public granary. A woman in the video said she had just bought the corn from the state grain stockpiler Sinograin. She explained that a lot of the corn is already moldy. There also appears to be large amounts of foreign material like dust mixed in.
无法通过这个视频让大姐闻到这个酸不溜叽的味儿，但是整过粮的就应该知道那是一种什么样的味道。躁动直属库的各位领导，国家给你们拿钱让你们存粮，你们就存这样。
The video prompted backlash on Chinese social media. Sinograin said that it has sent a team to investigate. As one of the world's largest grain stockpilers, Sinograin has over 200 billion worth in current assets. As of 2015, the amount of grain it bought from farmers accounted for close to half of all grain transactions in China. But the company has long been plagued with corruption and embezzlement scandals. In 2013, prosecutors charged over 100 Sinograin employees for embezzling more than $100 million worth of public funds. They were also charged with secretly selling grain stock and adding sand to the grain to make it heavier, allowing them to charge more money for less grain. 4 days after Chinese authorities dispatched an inspection team to tackle the corruption, a serious fire burned through one of the company's major grain storage bases. The blaze wiped out over 50,000 tons of corn and rice, causing netizens and the media to question whether the fire was set to destroy evidence of corruption. The memory of the fire is now being revived by the current grain quality controversy. Commenting on the news online, many mentioned the fire 6 years ago. One user wrote, "At least it's an internal investigation this time. If the authorities were to inspect, I believe there would soon be a fire breaking out." Meanwhile, some are worried about the prospect of food shortages. One commented, "After all, the heavy rain and flooding are pretty serious. Many places must have poor harvests this year, and we cannot import grains because of the pandemic. If something goes wrong with the grain stocks, that could lead to famine." Another wrote, "I'm really anxious." In March, fears of a possible rice shortage in China causes shoppers to fight over rice in the grocery stores. Across the nation, agricultural officials are currently encouraging farmers to convert their fruit orchards into farms that grow rice. China's communist authorities recently stressed that the country needs to ensure stability in 6 areas, including basic living needs and food security. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Nearly 600,000 voters cast their ballots in Hong Kong primaries over the weekend. They voted to select pro-democracy candidates who stand the best chance of success in September's Legislative Council elections. The number of voters far exceeded the estimated turnout of around 170,000 people.
Long queues continued to form outside polling stations across Hong Kong. This despite a warning that the election could breach the new national security law. Less than 2 weeks ago, Beijing imposed a sweeping draconian law in the region, stoking concerns that wide-ranging freedoms will be crushed. On the second day of the Democrats' primaries organized by Hong Kong's opposition camp, Hong Kongers tell us why they are voting. One of the residents lining up at a polling station says he's not intimidated by the new law, but some people definitely are.
So far, I don't know any friend of mine who is scared off by the national security law, but I think there are definitely people who fear the legislation as the government is not being reasonable nowadays. Of course, some of them are scared.
A Hong Kong University law professor and organizer of the primary vote said the election is not merely about selecting candidates, but about the determination to achieve democracy.
Hong Kong people, after all these years, since 2013, we have demonstrated to the world and also to the authority that we have not given up to strive for democracy for Hong Kong.
But this primary selection process does not mean that candidates will be able to stand. In recent years, Hong Kong authorities have started to use an obscure bureaucratic position to disqualify candidates from standing for election. So far, all the candidates who are disqualified are pro-democracy.
And if we have all our candidates at the end disqualified, actually the act of disqualifying them by itself will tell the whole world how the authority has used their powers arbitrarily to infringe the basic rights of Hong Kong people.
The election seeks to bolster the chance for pro-democracy candidates to achieve a 35-plus majority in the 70-seat legislature in polls in September, which would potentially give them the power to block government proposals.
Sweden said today it supports measures put forward by Germany and France for a robust response to China's new security law on Hong Kong. Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands are the latest to push the European Union to consider countermeasures on Beijing. And the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression said on Monday he was extremely concerned about the future of Hong Kong following the adoption of the national security law. A Chinese web censor learned the value of free speech and democracy and then defected to America. In our exclusive 3-part interview, he exposes the inside story of the CCP's complex system of internet censorship and how the Communist Party has been infiltrating the free world. Part 1 takes us behind the scenes at TikTok.
Liu Lipeng finally has the freedom to talk to our reporters about the CCP's internet censorship based on his personal experiences as a web censor. Liu has been working in internet censorship, what he calls a dirty industry, for over a decade. He used to work as a web censor for the Chinese microblogging site Sina Weibo, and later became the head of the censorship department at Le.com, one of the largest online video companies in China. Both companies are privately owned. Liu estimates China's private sector employs about 1 to 2 million web censors, almost as many as their Communist Party web commentators, commonly known as the 50 Cent Army. Web censors and the 50 Cent Army both work to suppress free speech. They delete posts that the authorities don't want people to see and spread fake or distorted news online. The 50 Cent Army is paid by the regime. However, the CCP doesn't want to pay to censor content from private internet companies. So to abide by the party's censorship regulations, all private internet companies have to hire their own web censors, which can amount to a large number. Liu says TikTok has at least 10,000 web censors, some of whom work at the company's Tianjin branch. TikTok is a video-sharing social networking service and very popular in the US and Europe. It is owned by Chinese company ByteDance. Liu described his experience visiting that branch for an interview as entering into a drug lord's lair. Everything there seemed hidden, and he was strictly forbidden from looking around while in the building. He was also kept away from the main working areas. Later, he discovered something TikTok has tried to hide.
I later realized TikTok was censoring American people's speech there. This huge number of Chinese web censors have been brainwashed by the CCP's propaganda for decades, and many of them are CCP members. These people living in fear of the CCP were there to censor American people's speech.
Liu explains TikTok has to obey CCP rules, even if it wants to operate in overseas markets. But it is impossible to apply the same level of censorship outside China, so the company has to promise the party it will do anything to stop Chinese people from using TikTok. He told us about who is not allowed to use TikTok.
The Chinese are not allowed to access TikTok. If you use a made-in-China cell phone, or if you have a Chinese SIM card, or if you are personally in China, any of these conditions will keep you out of TikTok.
Liu says the only reason TikTok has to withdraw from the Hong Kong market is that it overlaps with Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, which is only allowed to be used by Chinese people. Unlike other companies like Facebook or Google, TikTok did not mention anything about the national security law when they announced the withdrawal. Reporting by Xi Wenhui, NTD News.
A top White House advisor says he thinks the president will take strong action against Chinese-owned social media apps TikTok and WeChat. He says the apps are taking part in information warfare against the U.S., and they could be banned.
White House advisor Peter Navarro says he expects President Trump to take strong action against TikTok and WeChat, two Chinese-owned social media apps. He told Fox Business that all user data from the apps goes straight to servers in China and to the Chinese regime. Navarro said those apps can be used to steal personal and financial information for blackmail and extortion. They can be used to steal business intellectual property and proprietary secrets. Last week, President Trump said his administration is considering banning TikTok in the U.S. TikTok is owned by Chinese company ByteDance. It's popular with American teenagers. WeChat is owned by Chinese tech giant Tencent Holdings. It's the top messaging app in China, and Chinese people around the world use it. Many U.S. officials are concerned about TikTok, and now corporate America is looking into it. Wells Fargo told employees to remove TikTok from work phones because of security concerns. The company has denied allegations that it's a national security threat to the U.S. TikTok hired former Disney executive Kevin Mayer as its new CEO. But Navarro said it's the same thing that Huawei did, and putting an American puppet in charge isn't going to work.
The Chinese regime has sanctioned 4 U.S. officials and 1 U.S. entity. This comes days after the U.S. sanctioned Chinese Communist Party officials for serious human rights abuses in Xinjiang. The CCP vowed to fight back against the sanctions, saying they interfered with its internal affairs.
The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has targeted 4 Republican politicians and the U.S. Congressional Executive Commission on China by placing sanctions on them, Chinese officials said on Monday. It's retaliating for the sanctions the Trump administration placed on CCP officials last week for human rights abuses against ethnic minorities in China's Xinjiang region. Senators Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz are among those targeted. They have pushed legislation to punish CCP officials in Xinjiang. Senator Cruz wrote on Twitter, "The Chinese Communist Party is terrified and lashing out. They forced over 1 million Uyghurs into concentration camps and engaged in ethnic cleansing, including horrific forced abortions and sterilizations. These are egregious human rights atrocities that cannot be tolerated." Representative Chris Smith from New Jersey is being sanctioned too. He called on the world to condemn China's forced sterilization, abortions, and detention of Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, calling it genocide. Last week, the U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned 4 Communist Party members and 1 entity in China for serious human rights violations against ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. The action is taken as per President Trump's 2017 executive order, which builds upon and enacts the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. The Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control sanctioned the Communist Party Secretary of the Xinjiang region and the Xinjiang Public Security Bureau, among others. The CCP vowed it will definitely fight back against the U.S. sanctions. China's foreign ministry spokesman said it was interference in its internal affairs and that it threatens its sovereignty. This is the latest in a rising tension between the two superpowers. The relationship has been strained after the CCP virus pandemic and the national security law in Hong Kong. Not to mention the Trump administration's countering Beijing's aggressive posture in the South China Sea with a commitment to ensuring the international rule of law. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
In response to NTD Washington correspondent, the State Department confirmed that Beijing's sanctions on U.S. officials are retaliatory, but that they won't stop the U.S. from holding CCP officials accountable for their human rights abuses. The department says the U.S. imposed sanctions on the officials for violating human rights, particularly of religious minorities in Xinjiang. Meanwhile, the regime imposes sanctions on U.S. officials who work tirelessly to expose those abuses. The department also said that there's no moral equivalency between the CCP's sanctions and the actions of countries that try to hold the regime's officials accountable.
The U.S. State Department issued a travel advisory over the weekend for China. The security alert warns U.S. citizens to exercise increased caution in China due to the rising risk of detention and bans from leaving the country. U.S. citizens could face longer jail time without U.S. consular support or information on what their alleged crime is. This comes after Beijing passed its draconian national security law in Hong Kong. The draft includes people from outside Hong Kong that could potentially be punished for so-called violating the law. Lawyers and activists have expressed concern that China could use this as extraterritorial jurisdiction against anyone anywhere in the world. It's seen as an attempt to stifle global criticism of the regime. The State Department did not say what prompted the alert, but did add that U.S. citizens could be targeted, even for sending private messages. The alert added security personnel may detain and/or deport U.S. citizens for sending private electronic messages critical of the Chinese regime. The security alert comes as tensions remain between the two countries over a number of issues, from trade to the virus pandemic and human rights abuses in regards to Uyghur ethnic minorities. NATO Secretary General wants a more unified NATO worldwide in order to withstand China's growing influence. This includes political cooperation between the Atlantic Alliance and partners such as Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan. The Secretary General said that NATO should intensify its cooperation with the EU when it comes to building communication networks and other critical infrastructure. He also made clear that warfare has become much more digital, and China's military threat is increasing because of their improving AI technology. China's first stealth fighter jet was the subject of a thrust upgrade. Now the G-20B is ready for mass production, which started last week. But the fighter won't be built with Chinese engines. Chinese engineers are still working on engines for the fighter jet. That work has fallen behind schedule because the design has failed to meet requirements. According to military sources, the aircraft will instead be built with a Russian engine. Iran and China have drafted an economic and security partnership. The deal would be worth a total of $400 billion over 25 years. The New York Times reported that the agreement would expand China's infrastructure and military presence in Iran. In return, Iran could sell its oil to China, which other countries wouldn't buy because of the sanctions placed on Iran. The U.S. isolated the Iranian government over the past few years because of the nuclear and military threats it poses. A State Department spokeswoman wrote that the U.S. will continue to impose costs on Chinese companies that do business with Iran. The amount of bad loans in China will increase in the near future. That's according to the country's banking regulator. It says the stage is already set. It's just that virus relief incentives have delayed it showing up in the bank's balance sheets.
China's banking regulator is telling lenders to prepare for a jump in the number of non-performing loans. It's advising them to preserve capital by limiting dividend payments and capping bonuses. What makes things worse is it says small and medium-sized banks are facing deteriorating asset quality. They're invested heavily in the housing and stock markets, violating regulations. This will make it harder for the banks to remain solvent should we start seeing defaults. According to official figures, the country's GDP shrank by almost 7% in the first quarter, but banking profits grew by 6%. The regulator defended the disconnect by saying it's just a lag in the banks feeling the effect of the pandemic.
The Secretary of Education is encouraging schools to reopen in the fall. She says it's for the benefit of both older students and younger children, and that it can be done safely.
Education Secretary Betsy DeVos vowed to have schools reopened nationwide in the fall. She said students need to be attending school in person.
There is nothing in the data that would suggest that kids being back in school is dangerous to them. Kids need to be in school. They need to be learning. They need to be moving ahead.
During an appearance on Fox News Sunday, she said that it will be a matter of how, not a matter of if. She said opening schools can be done safely and that guidelines from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are there to guide, not be absolute rules.
The CDC guidelines are just that, meant to be flexible and meant to be applied as appropriate for the situation.
The CDC lists a number of considerations for schools around social distancing, the sharing of equipment, and cleaning, among others. But she expects virus hotspots to be dealt with differently. DeVos said the CDC never recommended that schools be shuttered in the first place. She added that students have fallen behind this spring. And there are other concerns as well. She said mental, emotional, and social issues have arisen among children who are not in school.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.